There's something about national parks. The quiet, the open sky, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the rest of the world. Millions of people visit them every year looking for peace, adventure, or just a break from the noise of daily life. But not everyone comes back. Across the United States, there are stories of people who vanished in these wild, beautiful places. People who were never seen again. Some were experienced hikers, others were young children. Some disappeared while walking with friends. Others stepped off the trail for just a moment, and then they were gone. What's disturbing isn't just how many of these cases exist, it's the details. The way some victims seem to vanish without a trace. The way trained search teams find nothing. The way scent dogs lose the trail. The way bodies are found in places that had already been searched, or how some are never found at all. These aren't just accidents. Something about them doesn't add up. Today, we're going to look at a few of these disappearances. Real cases, real people, and questions that still have no answers. Because in the wilderness, it doesn't take much to disappear. And once you do, it can be like you were never there at all. The vanishing of Dennis Martin. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The Martin family from Knoxville, Tennessee, decided to spend it deep in the wilderness, surrounded by the green ridges and shaded hollows of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They were experienced hikers. The father, William Martin, had planned a special bonding trip with his two sons, Douglas and 6-year-old Dennis. His own father, Clyde Martin, came along as well, making it 3 generations of the Martin family, out for a wholesome weekend in the fresh air. Their destination was Spencefield, a highland meadow sitting right near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. It's remote, surrounded by dense forest and miles of steep trails, but the Martins weren't new to this. They'd done similar trips before. And on the 13th of June, they hiked several miles into the backcountry, reaching their camping spot by late afternoon. Another family, the Key family, was also nearby that weekend, and the 2 families' children began playing together in the meadow. The boys ran around, laughing, playing a sort of impromptu hide-and-seek among the low shrubs. Dennis, dressed in a bright red shirt and green shorts, decided to sneak up on the adults from behind the brush, a playful surprise. His father saw him step off the trail and behind a bush. That was the last time anyone ever saw Dennis Martin. Within minutes, the mood shifted. The kids regrouped, but Dennis didn't return. William Martin immediately stood up, calling for him, then shouting, then running. Within 5 minutes, he was sprinting down the Appalachian Trail, covering nearly 2 miles, looking for any sign of his son. He found nothing. Back at the meadow, Dennis's grandfather, Clyde, hiked almost 9 miles back to the ranger station at Cades Cove to alert the National Park Service. By nightfall, a thunderstorm rolled in, dumping over 2 inches of rain across the search area. It was the worst thing that could have happened. The heavy downpour washed away footprints, diluted scent trails, and turned the rough trails into mud. Temperatures dropped into the 40s that night. By the next morning, the search for Dennis Martin was in full swing. Over the next week, a massive operation unfolded. The FBI, National Guard, Green Berets from Fort Bragg, Boy Scouts, local volunteers, bloodhounds, helicopters, over 1,400 people in total scoured the area. They used grid patterns, scent dogs, helicopters with infrared, and loudspeaker systems calling out Dennis's name. Searchers waded through steep ravines, thick underbrush, and bear-infested hillsides. Some areas were so remote they could only be reached by crawling. Despite all of it, there was not a single trace of Dennis. No clothing, no scent, no disturbed foliage, nothing. A key part of the timeline emerged later, and it remains controversial. On the same afternoon Dennis disappeared, the Key family, the other group camping nearby, was hiking roughly 3 miles downhill from Spencefield. They were walking along Romans Creek Trail when they heard what the father, Harold Key, described as a sickening scream. A few seconds later, Harold said he saw a rough-looking man dart into the woods and disappear. Mr. Key described the man as disheveled, possibly barefoot, with unkempt hair and dark clothing. It wasn't just a glimpse. He watched him for several moments as he moved away from the trail. This happened around 5:30 p.m., the same time Dennis went missing. But here's the strange part. The FBI and National Park Service didn't take that sighting seriously at first. The sighting was reported days later. And although the timeline matched, officials initially believed it was unrelated. Some later investigators speculated that the man might have been an off-grid survivalist or even a moonshiner hiding out in the park, something not uncommon in that region at the time. The idea that Dennis might have been abducted was considered, but never officially accepted. After all, this was the middle of a protected national forest, miles from any road, trailhead, or civilization. What kind of person could have gotten in and out of that area with a child completely unnoticed? In the days that followed, a child's footprint was found near a stream. It was small, possibly the size of a 6-year-old's 4. It was barefoot, but it was inconclusive. Other items, a shoe print, a potential piece of cloth were found, but none could be definitively linked to Dennis. Weeks passed, then months. By mid-June, the organized search was officially called off. Still, the Martin family never stopped. They hired psychics. They sent letters to senators. They explored the possibility of criminal abduction, even after the authorities had dismissed it. William Martin was convinced that someone had taken his son. And then came the rumors. Years later, a former Special Forces operative anonymous, but reportedly stationed at Fort Bragg, gave a statement claiming that the Green Berets had been deployed for something unusual. According to this source, they weren't cooperating with the other teams. They had their own area, their own communications. And they seemed to be looking not just for a missing boy, but for something else entirely, something they didn't talk about. That led to a wave of speculation. Cryptids, government cover-ups, underground cave systems, wild men, even Bigfoot. But in the official records, nothing of that sort is mentioned. The official case file from the National Park Service describes a tragic but mundane theory. Dennis, a small boy in a red shirt, wandered off, got lost in the thick undergrowth, and succumbed to the elements. But even that theory is hard to square with the facts. The search area was heavily combed. If Dennis had simply gotten lost and died from exposure, searchers would have likely found some trace, clothing, bones, or his body. But no remains have ever been recovered. And it's not like the Smokies are flat. Much of the terrain is made up of vertical drops, thick brush, and caves. Some areas can only be accessed by crawling or climbing, often dangerous even for adults. And so the questions remain. What happened to Dennis Martin that day in 1969? Did he wander off and fall into one of the countless sinkholes or crevices that crisscross the Smokies? Was he taken by a wild animal, a bear or cougar, and carried far away before the search even began? Or did the Key family witness something much darker, something the authorities were unwilling to confront? To this day, the disappearance of Dennis Martin is one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in U.S. National Park history. It's the reason some hikers still avoid the western edge of the Smokies. It's a case referenced in Missing 411. And for over 5 decades, there's been no resolution. Just silence. Just an empty meadow. And a red shirt that was never found. The strange disappearance of Thelma Pauline Melton, Great Smoky Mountains, 1981. This one happened on a quiet September afternoon in 1981. And it's strange, not just because of who went missing, but how and where. Thelma Pauline Melton or just Polly to her friends, was 58 years old. She wasn't some young hiker chasing mountain peaks. She wasn't a kid who wandered too far. She was a middle-aged woman, a Sunday school teacher, well-liked and well-grounded, who went missing in broad daylight on one of the most walked trails in the entire Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And somehow, even though 2 people were hiking with her, she vanished without a trace. Let's rewind. Polly and her husband, Bob Melton, lived in West Asheville, North Carolina. Every year, they took camping trips to the Smokies, especially to a familiar site near Deep Creek Campground in the southern part of the park. They'd been doing it for over 20 years. It was routine. It was tradition. Polly wasn't in perfect health. She had high blood pressure, arthritis, and was on medications, but she was mobile. She loved walking the trails, especially the Deep Creek Trail, a moderately easy hike that meanders along a gentle creek. She'd done it hundreds of times before. On the afternoon of the 25th of September, 1981, Polly was at the campground with 2 family friends, Trula and Red, a married couple in their 60s. Bob, her husband, had stayed behind at the trailer. It was around 3 p.m. when the trio started hiking. It was warm and clear. They took it slow, walking uphill at a steady pace, just like they always did. Polly, wearing a red blouse, tan pants, and white sneakers, was reportedly in good spirits. She even joked around during the walk. 15 minutes into the hike, Polly picked up the pace. She suddenly walked ahead of Trula and Red, not running, but moving briskly enough that they couldn't keep up. They saw her round a bend in the trail, still moving confidently. They expected to catch up to her around the next curve. But when they reached that bend, Polly was gone. Just gone. At first, they assumed she kept walking, and they'd find her up ahead. But after several more minutes, she was nowhere in sight. They picked up their pace. Then they began calling for her. Then they panicked. The trail wasn't that complicated. It followed a creek, and there were no major intersections or offshoots nearby. After walking all the way back to camp and finding no sign of Polly, Trula and Red alerted Bob and the park rangers. The search began that evening, and once again it grew into a massive operation. Rangers, dogs, volunteers, helicopters, they canvassed the trail, surrounding woods, and the creek. They searched every cave, ravine, and dense patch of forest. Dogs picked up no scent. Not one single item, no shoe, no clothing, no dropped personal item was ever found. Remember, this was a flat, easy trail, a Sunday trail, one of the least likely places for a fatal accident in the entire park. There were no cliffs nearby, no rivers to fall into, no dangerous terrain, and it was broad daylight. It gets weirder. Polly had no history of mental illness. She had no known enemies, no signs of dementia. She hadn't shown any signs of depression. Her financials were normal. Her husband said there was no argument. Nothing was out of the ordinary. But some strange details did come up. A campground volunteer reported that earlier that same day, Polly had seemed nervous or anxious. Not panicked, just slightly off. She had also reportedly made a phone call from a nearby payphone before the hike, something she rarely did while camping. Nobody ever figured out who she called. The number was never traced. Her phone records led nowhere. There's more. In the days that followed, Bob told police that Polly had packed very little for the trip, far less than she usually did. She had no ID on her, no purse, no wallet. It didn't make sense, given how often she hiked that trail and how well she knew the park. Some began to wonder, could Polly have walked off intentionally? But if that was the case, how? Where did she go? She was nearly 60, with health problems, in broad daylight on a public trail. There were dozens of other hikers around that day. Nobody else saw her. No vehicle was seen waiting near the trailhead. No sounds were heard. No witnesses ever came forward saying they saw a woman matching her description off the trail or in distress. Others considered another possibility that Polly didn't walk away, that something else happened. something quick, something silent. Could someone have been waiting near the trail? Could she have been lured or forced into the woods by someone she knew? The sudden phone call that morning, her odd behavior, the way she sped ahead, some say it all fits a pattern. That maybe Polly had arranged to meet someone secretly and it went wrong. But again, no evidence was ever found, and there were no signs of struggle. Over the years, many have speculated. Some believe Polly had grown tired of her life and disappeared on purpose. But friends and family strongly rejected that theory. She was deeply rooted in her church. She had no known reason to run. And even if she had vanished intentionally, how would she survive? She had no gear, no supplies, no survival training, and nobody saw her leave the trail. Another theory points to a health crisis. Maybe Polly suffered a sudden stroke or heart attack and stumbled off the trail in confusion. But again, trained searchers combed every square foot of that area. Not even a trace of disturbed ground or vegetation. Dogs found nothing. To this day, Polly Melton's disappearance is unsolved. The National Park Service never closed the case, but eventually, the search faded. Bob returned home alone. He died a few years later, reportedly never recovering from the loss. In interviews, he often said he believed she simply walked into the woods and never came back. But the truth? It's never been found. Not a footprint. Not a body. Not a single clue. And here's the part that really gets people. Polly's disappearance is not the only one from that same part of the Smokies. Over the years, several hikers, all adults, all familiar with the area, have vanished in the same general zone near Deep Creek. None were ever found. All were in good spirits. All disappeared quickly, without any distress call, and with no clues left behind. It's like the forest swallowed them whole. In the missing 411 files, Polly's case is a textbook example. She was last seen in daylight, was familiar with the area, had no known reason to flee, and vanished silently in a place where vanishing should have been impossible. No wildlife attack, no natural disaster, no accident, just gone. The trail where it happened is still there today, and people still hike it. Families, couples, retirees. Most of them walk right past the spot where Polly vanished without ever knowing the story. But if you stop and listen, really listen, there's an eerie stillness there, like the forest is holding its breath. And maybe, just maybe, keeping its secrets, the disappearance of Christopher Tomkins, Harris County, Georgia, 2002. This one didn't happen in a deep wilderness or a mountaintop trail. It happened right along a quiet stretch of woods beside a country road in Georgia. It's not a national park, but it has the same hallmarks: isolation, wilderness, and a disappearance that defies logic. Christopher Tomkins was 20 years old, not a kid, not elderly, a healthy young man with no known issues, no criminal record, no history of drug use, no diagnosed mental illness. Just a regular guy from Ellerslie, Georgia, working as a surveyor's assistant in the rural backwoods of Harris County. He'd been on the job for only a few weeks when he disappeared. The date was the 25th of January, 2002. That morning, he left home wearing a black shirt, blue pants, work boots, and a pair of blue overalls. It was a typical winter day in Georgia. Cool, not freezing. He had breakfast, said goodbye to his mom, and caught a ride to a remote roadside job site with 3 coworkers. The area they were surveying wasn't far from Warm Springs Road, a 2-lane blacktop slicing through trees and farmland. They parked and spread out along a fence line to measure distances through an undeveloped patch of woods. Christopher was walking behind the group, roughly 50 feet back, keeping pace, carrying equipment. Then, he was gone. One moment, he was there. The next, he wasn't right. His coworker, who had just glanced back at him less than a minute earlier, turned around again and didn't see him. No sound, no shout, nothing. At first, the team thought he ducked into the brush to relieve himself. But after a few minutes passed with no sign of him, they got worried. They searched the immediate area. Then they called his name. Then they panicked. The trail wasn't complicated. It followed a fence line in relatively open woods. After 15-20 minutes, they alerted the supervisor. The police were called soon after. A search began that afternoon. And then things got weird. Roughly 50 feet from the last place Christopher was seen, caught on the barbed wire of the fence, was a single piece of fabric from his overalls. Not torn, not shredded, just a clean section, snagged. Near it on the ground, one of his boots, a work boot, sitting upright. 12 feet away, in the direction of the woods, his other boot. Then, a little farther on, one of his socks. And that was it. That was all that was ever found of Christopher Tomkins. No blood, no footprints leading away, no drag marks, no tire tracks, no signs of a struggle, no signs of wildlife activity, no scent trail the dogs could follow, just a path of items spaced apart as if they'd been dropped or discarded or pulled off in motion. But Christopher himself, gone. The woods there are not dense. They're not like the Smokies or Yellowstone. This was rolling rural land, patchy trees, and open fields. You can see in every direction. There was nowhere to hide. No caves, cliffs, or rivers. And he vanished in the middle of the day. The first theory was obvious. Maybe he ran away. But his mother shut that down fast. Christopher had no reason to run. He was living at home, attending church, working a steady job, and had no mental health concerns. His finances were stable. There was no girlfriend drama, no family trouble. And his coworker said he'd seemed totally normal that morning, laughing, talking, carrying his tools, like always. And besides, if you run away, you don't do it by leaving one boot behind. Police began looking at the coworkers. The four of them were the last people to see Christopher alive. All of them gave statements. All said he was just walking behind them and then wasn't. None of them heard anything unusual. None reported any argument, tension, or incident. None of them had criminal records. No one reported seeing a vehicle or a stranger nearby, just empty woods. Still, suspicion lingered. One boot off? Maybe. But both boots off, spaced apart? A piece of overall snagged? A sock? It didn't line up with someone simply walking away. Nor did it match typical wildlife predation. A coyote or bear doesn't undress its prey mid-pursuit. Later, cadaver dogs were brought in. They picked up no scent. Helicopters flew overhead, using thermal imaging. Nothing. Searchers walked the entire area, then widened the perimeter. They found nothing else. Not a footprint, not a clothing tag, not a body. And the worst part? That same spot where Christopher vanished is bordered by private land. One of the parcels nearby is fenced in with no trespassing signs and an old, weathered farmhouse. Locals say the place has been abandoned for years. But some searchers claim that when they tried to check the property, the owner refused access. Police later said the landowner was cooperative, but nothing from that property was ever made public. Some speculate that Christopher was taken, that someone or something grabbed him in broad daylight and pulled him into a vehicle or into the woods, so fast and so silently that the other three guys never saw a thing. That the missing clothing items were left as some kind of trail or were pulled off during a struggle. Others speculate he was the victim of foul play, that something happened among the group and the others covered it up. But again, no blood, no drag marks, no disturbed ground, nothing to clean up. And the guys were spaced out along a straight fence line in clear terrain. If something violent had happened, someone would have heard it. And then, the most their theories emerged. Some believe there's something odd about that land, that people have seen lights there, that the woods in that corner of Harris County aren't normal, that strange things have happened there before, unexplained noises, figures in the tree line. Some locals even warn the family not to search too deep. But again, no official evidence backs that up. In the end, Christopher Tomkins' case went cold. More than 20 years later, there's been no sign of him. No sightings, no body, no activity on his social security number, driver's license, or bank accounts. His mother, Anne, still keeps a small shrine for him in her home. She's never stopped asking questions, never stopped wondering what really happened in those woods. She told a reporter once, "You don't just vanish. People don't just disappear into thin air. Somebody knows something. Maybe someone does." Or maybe Christopher's disappearance is one of those rare, impossible cases where logic breaks down and nothing adds up. Where 1 second someone is here, and the next, they're not. Next story. Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon, is vast, stretching over 1 million acres of rugged wilderness, towering pines, volcanic ridges, and rushing streams. For decades, it's drawn hikers, campers, and hunters seeking peace and adventure. But it's also a place where people vanish sometimes without a trace. One of the most baffling is the case of 17-year-old Bobby Bizip. Bobby was a high school senior from Sandy, Oregon, just a short drive from Mount Hood. He was an avid outdoorsman, hiking, fishing, hunting with his family and friends. Described as responsible, intelligent, and careful, Bobby was well prepared for the wilderness. On the 28th of August, 1993, Bobby and his 15-year-old friend Scott set out for a day trip into the forest. Their goal, a popular hiking route near Timothy Lake, roughly 50 miles southeast of Portland. The weather was perfect, clear skies, mid-70s, late summer. They started hiking early in the morning. The trail was well-maintained, moderately challenging, winding through dense forest and along ridges with breathtaking views of Mount Hood itself. Bobby carried a backpack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map. Scott had his camera and some fishing gear. Both had sturdy boots, and both were experienced hikers. They planned to return by late afternoon, but they never did. When night fell and they hadn't returned, Bobby's parents became worried and contacted local authorities. A search was launched immediately. The initial search focused on the hiking trail and the surrounding forest. Teams of rangers, volunteers, and K-9 units combed the area for any sign of the boys. The next morning, about 3 miles into the trail, searchers found Scott alone. He was unharmed but shaken. Scott told the searchers that Bobby had separated from him earlier that day to fish near a creek and promised to meet back at a specific spot after an hour. Scott waited, but Bobby never returned. Then, after several hours, Scott decided to hike back alone to get help. Scott's story was consistent. He seemed genuine and distraught. But the question was, where was Bobby? Despite exhaustive searching over the next 2 weeks, no trace of Bobby was found. No footprints beyond where Scott last saw him. No fishing gear. No discarded clothing. No personal items. No disturbed foliage or broken branches that could indicate a fall or struggle. Rangers expanded the search radius to 20 miles, checked nearby creeks, lakes, caves, and even old logging roads. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the area repeatedly. Search dogs were brought in, but they picked up no scent. Bobby was simply gone. Theories began to circulate. Some speculated he'd fallen into a deep crevice or cave and become trapped or injured, but no one could find evidence of that. The terrain was rugged, but the area where he disappeared was well known and frequently visited by hikers and fishermen. Others suggested a wild animal attack bear, cougar, but such attacks usually leave evidence: blood, clothing, tracks. None were found. Another theory involved foul play. Some believe that Bobby might have been abducted by someone in the area, but there were no reports of suspicious activity, no witnesses, no motives. The local community was devastated. Bobby was a well-loved teenager with no known enemies. His disappearance remained a mystery. What makes this case chilling is what happened years later. In 1998, 5 years after Bobby vanished, a hunter came across a small, weathered backpack roughly 15 miles from the original disappearance site. Inside was a water bottle, a tattered map, and a faded photograph of Bobby and his family. The backpack was identified as Bobby's pard. But beyond that, there was still no sign of Bobby himself. The backpack had clearly been out in the elements for a long time, but it was strangely clean inside. No blood, no obvious damage. It raised more questions than answers. How did the backpack get so far from where he was last seen? Was Bobby alive for days, wandering the forest? Or did someone else move his belongings? The FBI and local authorities reopened the case after the backpack was found, but were again unable to locate any further evidence. Today, Bobby Bizip's disappearance remains unsolved. The forest keeps its secrets, as it has for centuries. Mount Hood's wilderness is beautiful, but also unforgiving. And for Bobby and his family, the answer they seek has never come. It's wild, right? These disappearances remind us how unpredictable and mysterious even the most beautiful places can be. It makes you think twice about the stories the wilderness keeps hidden. If you found these stories as fascinating or as chilling as I did, please go ahead and like this video. And don't forget to share it with your friends who love a good mystery or the great outdoors. I've got more stories like these lined up, so if you want to dive deeper into unexplained vanishings and strange happenings, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out. See you on the next one.